The boy was 9 years old, weighed barely 60 pounds, and had not slept in a real bed in 19 nights. But the moment he saw the old man in the wheelchair stranded at the curb on the corner of Grand River and Linwood, with the traffic light already changing, and the front wheels of his chair stuck in a deep crack in the asphalt, he did not hesitate for even a second. He ran. He ran across 2 lanes of slowing Detroit traffic in sneakers that were held together with electrical tape, and when he reached the curb, he was already saying the words before he had time to think about them. "Let me help you cross, sir. I got you. I got you, sir. Just hold on." The old man, who had been trying for almost 3 full minutes to push himself out of that crack with hands that no longer worked the way they once had, looked up at the small, thin face suddenly appearing beside him and could not, for a moment, find his voice. People had been passing him for those 3 full minutes. A woman with a shopping bag, a man in a delivery uniform, 2 teenagers with headphones in, a bus driver who had glanced at him through a windshield and then looked away. Not one of them had stopped, and now here was a boy who looked like he had not eaten a hot meal in a month, gripping the back of his wheelchair with both small hands as if it were the most important job in the world. The old man's name was Edmund Cole. He was 81 years old, and in the city of Detroit, in the state of Michigan, in the country that had made him one of the quietest billionaires alive, almost no one outside a very small circle knew his face. But the boy did not know that. The boy did not know anything about Edmund Cole except that he was old and tired, and his wheelchair was stuck, and the light was about to turn red again, and no one else in the whole gray, rushing city was going to help him. His name was Caleb Hayes. And the story of what happened in the next 48 hours, the story that began at that broken curb on a Thursday afternoon in early December, would change not only his own life, but the lives of more children in the city of Detroit than anyone watching that intersection that day could possibly have imagined. Before we go any further, do me a small favor. Drop a comment below telling me which city you are watching from, because I love seeing where this community gathers from all over the world. And if stories about quiet kindness, second chances, and the moments that change everything are the kind of stories that stay with you, hit that subscribe button so the next one finds its way to you too. Detroit in early December had a particular kind of cold to it that anyone who had ever lived through a Michigan winter understood in their bones. It was not the sharp, dry cold of the open prairie. It was a wet cold, a cold that came up off the river and wrapped itself around the old brick buildings and the empty lots and the chain-link fences, and settled into the seams of every jacket that was not heavy enough. The sky that Thursday afternoon was the color of dishwater. The light coming through it was thin and reluctant, as if the sun itself had decided it could not be bothered with Detroit today. Steam rose from the manhole covers in slow, lazy ribbons that the wind tore apart almost as soon as they appeared. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang 4 times, and then went silent. Caleb Hayes had been standing on the corner of Grand River and Linwood for almost an hour before the old man in the wheelchair appeared. He had not been standing there for any particular reason. He had been standing there because his legs were tired, and because the warm air coming out of the laundromat behind him spilled out onto the sidewalk every time the door opened, and because standing in one place for too long made you look like you had somewhere to be, which was safer in this part of the city than looking like you had nowhere to go. He was small for his age. His mother, when she had been alive, had called him her little sparrow, because his bones were thin and quick and his eyes never stopped watching the sky. His jacket was a man's jacket, far too big for him, and the sleeves had been rolled up so many times that the cuffs had become permanent, thick bands at his wrists. His sneakers had once been white. They were now the color of the sidewalk, which was no color at all. The electrical tape that held the left sole to the upper had been wrapped around so many times that it looked almost like a strange black flower blooming around his foot. In the inside pocket of his jacket, against his chest, where the warmth of his body could keep it from freezing, was a folded piece of notebook paper with a phone number written on it in blue ink. The number belonged to a social worker named Patricia, who had told him 2 weeks ago to call her if he ever needed anything. He had not called. He had not called Patricia because calling Patricia meant a placement, and a placement meant a house full of strangers, and a house full of strangers meant being one of 4 or 5 or 6 children that no one had time to really see. He had heard the stories. He had heard them from older kids on the block, kids who had aged out and come back to the neighborhood with cigarettes and tired eyes, kids who said things like, "You think the street is bad, baby, you have not seen bad yet." So Caleb had folded the paper carefully and put it in his pocket and decided that he would call Patricia the day he could not stand to be alone anymore. He had been deciding that one day at a time for 19 days, and then the wheelchair appeared. It came rolling slowly out of the side entrance of the public library across the street, pushed by no one, propelled by two old hands turning two thin metal rims. The man in the chair was small, smaller than Caleb had expected an old man to be, as if the years had been folding him up bit by bit and tucking him into himself. He wore a heavy dark green coat that looked warm and a flat cap of the same color, and a thick wool scarf the color of cream wrapped twice around his neck. On his lap was a single thin library book and a brown paper bag with the top folded down. He moved slowly. He moved the way a person moves when every push of the wheel costs them something they cannot afford to lose. Caleb had watched him cross the parking lot. He had watched him push himself up the small ramp at the edge of the sidewalk. He had watched him turn onto Grand River and begin the slow journey toward the corner where the light would have to be timed perfectly, where the curb would have to be exactly the right height, where any small crack or pothole in the asphalt could undo the whole afternoon. And then the front wheel had caught. It caught on a crack that the city had been promising to fix for as long as anyone could remember. The chair lurched. The library book slid off the old man's lap and landed face down on the wet pavement. The brown paper bag tipped but did not fall. The old man tried to push himself backwards, but the back wheels could not get enough traction on the slick concrete, and the front wheel was wedged in deep, and the harder he pushed, the more the chair seemed to settle into its trap. Caleb saw the woman with the shopping bag walk past. He saw the man in the delivery uniform walk past. He saw the teenagers with headphones and walk past. He saw the bus driver glance and look away. And something in his chest, something small and hot and very old for a 9-year-old to be carrying, finally moved. He ran. When he reached the wheelchair, he did not stop to ask permission because he understood without being told that asking permission was the kind of thing that took time, and time was the one thing the light at the intersection was not going to give them. He bent down beside the stuck wheel and he put both his hands on the cold metal frame just above it, and he lifted. The chair did not move. He set his feet, the way he had once seen his uncle set his feet to lift a refrigerator into a truck, and he lifted again, harder this time, with the whole small, thin weight of his body pressed up into the effort. The front wheel popped free of the crack with a soft scraping sound, and the chair settled back onto all four wheels on the smooth concrete. The old man let out a long, slow breath that he had clearly been holding for a while. "Oh," he said, just that. Oh, as if a small door had opened in a wall he had been pressed against for a long time. Caleb did not say anything yet. He stepped quickly around to the front of the chair, picked up the library book off the wet pavement, wiped it carefully on the cleanest part of his oversized jacket, and placed it back on the old man's lap with both hands, the way you would return a sleeping baby to its bed. Then he stepped to the back of the chair, gripped the worn rubber handles, and looked up at the traffic light. It was about to turn green for them. He had 3 seconds, maybe 4. "Sir," he said, "I am going to push you across now. The light is going to change. Just hold on to your book and your bag and I will get you to the other side all right." The old man turned his head slightly so he could see the boy behind him, and Caleb saw for the first time the full face of the man he had stopped to help. It was a face that had been handsome once, a long time ago, and was now something better than handsome. It was a face that had been lived in. The skin was thin and spotted at the temples. The eyebrows were white and full. The eyes were a deep brown, almost black, and they were very alert, very awake, the way the eyes of certain old people remain awake long after the rest of them has slowed down. "All right, son," Edmund Cole said quietly. "I am in your hands." The light turned green. Caleb pushed. The chair moved more easily than he had expected, because the wheels were good wheels, and the old man, despite his coat and his scarf, and the years pressed into his bones, did not weigh as much as a 9-year-old boy might fear an 81-year-old man would weigh. The wind came down Grand River straight off the river itself and pushed against them, and Caleb leaned into the handles and pushed back, and the wheelchair rolled steadily across the wet asphalt, with the small, uneven rhythm of a thing being carried by a child who had decided that nothing in the world was going to stop him. They reached the opposite curb just as the light began to count down. Caleb tilted the chair back the way he had seen people on television do it, lifting the front wheels first, easing them up onto the sidewalk, and then guiding the back wheels up after them with a small, careful push. The whole maneuver took maybe 4 seconds. When it was done, he stepped around to the front of the chair and looked at the old man and said, in the same polite, formal voice his mother had once taught him to use with people he did not know, "There you go, sir. You made it across all right." Edmund Cole sat very still in his chair on the corner of Grand River and Trumbull, with his library book on his lap and his paper bag tilted slightly against his hip, and he looked at the boy in front of him for a long time before he spoke. The wind moved the white hair beneath his cap. The thin December light caught the side of his face. Somewhere down the block, a car horn sounded twice and then went silent. "What is your name, young man?" Edmund asked. "Caleb, sir, Caleb Hayes." "Caleb." Edmund repeated the name the way a person tastes a word he has not heard in a long time, turning it slowly on his tongue to see what was inside it. "That is a fine old name, a scout's name. Do you know who Caleb was?" "No, sir. He was one of the only two grown men in a very large group of people who, when they were asked to be brave, said yes. Everybody else said no." Edmund smiled a small, dry smile. "Your parents chose well." Caleb did not answer. He looked down at his electrical tape sneakers, and he did not say that his father had left before he was born, and that his mother had chosen his name from a book she had borrowed from the library on Grand River, the very same library Edmund Cole had just come out of, and that she had died of pneumonia in a county hospital in February of the previous year, because she had not gone to the emergency room until it was too late. Because going to the emergency room meant a bill she could not pay, and the bill she could not pay had been more frightening to her than the cough that had been getting worse for 3 weeks. He did not say any of that. He only stood there on the sidewalk with his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his oversized jacket and waited for whatever was going to come next. Edmund Cole was watching him very closely now, the way a man watches a bird that has landed unexpectedly close to his window. He had spent 60 years building a very large company by being very good at reading the people in front of him. He had read men in tailored suits across mahogany conference tables. He had read women in factory uniforms holding clipboards full of complaints. He had read lawyers and bankers and union representatives and governors, and once, memorably, a sitting United States senator who had come to ask him for a campaign contribution, and who had walked out of the office an hour later with nothing in his pocket and a great deal less certainty about himself than he had walked in with. Edmund Cole could read a person. And what he was reading on the sidewalk outside the library that afternoon was a small boy who had not eaten in some time, who had not slept indoors in some time, and who had, despite both of those facts, run across 2 lanes of traffic to help a stranger. "Caleb," Edmund said gently, "I would like to ask you a few things, and I want you to know up front that you do not owe me any answers. You helped me. That is the beginning and the end of any obligation between us. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." "Where are your people, son?" Caleb's eyes did not lift from the sidewalk. The toes of his electrical tape sneakers were very close together, the way the feet of a small animal hold themselves when the animal is trying to be still. The wind pulled at the loose ends of his too big jacket. A cluster of dead leaves skittered past them and into the gutter. "My mother passed, sir," Caleb said, his voice low but clear. "Last year. And it has just been me since then." He did not say since when. He did not say whether there had been someone else in between, an aunt or a grandmother or a placement that had not worked out. He did not need to. Edmund Cole, who had heard a great many sentences in his 81 years of listening, heard everything that was inside those few words. He nodded once. He did not say, "I am sorry." What he said instead was this: "Caleb, I have a small problem, and I am hoping you might be able to help me with it again. I came out of the library this afternoon meaning to go a few blocks east to a small place I know that sells coffee. My driver is meeting me there in about half an hour. The truth is that pushing myself the rest of the way on these old sidewalks is going to take me longer than I want to admit, and I am tired. I would be glad of the company, and I would be glad of the help if you have a little time and you would not mind." Caleb looked up. He looked at the old man in the wheelchair, at the white eyebrows and the deep brown eyes, at the cream-colored scarf and the heavy green coat, at the library book and the brown paper bag, and he understood without being able to say it that the old man was not asking for help. The old man was making him a small, careful offer, the kind of offer that adults sometimes made to children when they wanted the child to be able to say yes without having to ask for anything. "Yes, sir," Caleb said. "I have time." "Good." Edmund settled his book and his bag more firmly on his lap and gave Caleb a small nod. "It is 4 blocks. We will take it slow." So Caleb stepped behind the chair again, took the worn rubber handles in both small hands, and began to push. They moved east along Grand River, away from the river, and toward the streets where the old commercial buildings began to give way to a row of small businesses that had survived the bad years and the worse years, and were now, slowly, beginning to look like they might survive the years that were coming. They passed a barbershop with 3 old men inside, 2 in the chairs and 1 waiting, all of them turning their heads to watch the small boy pushing the old man in the green coat. They passed a Korean grocery where the owner was sweeping the sidewalk outside, and the owner stopped his broom and nodded once at Edmund as if he had known him for 30 years, which in fact he had. They passed a vacant lot where someone had built a small community garden out of old tires and reclaimed wood, the beds covered now for winter with sheets of black plastic that rustled in the wind. Caleb pushed in silence for the first block. The wheelchair was heavier than it had felt at the curb because now he was pushing for distance, and the wind kept finding new ways to slow them down, and his arms, which had not been asked to do anything like this in a very long time, began to ache in a quiet, familiar way. He did not slow down. He had been given a job, and the job was 4 blocks long, and 4 blocks long was 4 blocks long. Halfway down the second block, Edmund spoke without turning his head. "Caleb, may I ask you something else?" "Yes, sir." "When was the last time you ate something hot?" The question was so quietly put that it did not feel like a question at all. It felt like an observation made out loud, the way a person might say it is colder than I thought it would be today. Caleb's hands tightened on the rubber handles. He pushed for another half a step before he answered. "Day before yesterday, sir, a man at the shelter on Selden gave me a bowl of soup." "And the shelter on Selden, do you sleep there?" "No, sir. They are full most nights, and I do not like the rooms with that many people in them. I get jumpy." Edmund nodded slowly. He did not turn his head. He understood that the boy was telling him the truth more easily because he was speaking to the back of an old man's cap and not to the old man's face. Some confessions were like that. Some confessions needed a small distance to come out. "And where do you sleep then?" There was a long pause. The wheels of the chair clicked softly on a small, uneven place in the sidewalk. A pigeon flew up from the gutter ahead of them and resettled on a fire escape. "There is a place behind the loading dock at the old Sears building, sir. Some boards lean against a wall. It is dry there. I have a sleeping bag I keep there during the day rolled up under the boards. It has been all right so far. The man who works the dock knows I am there. He has not said anything about it." "How long have you been there, Caleb?" 19 nights, sir." Edmund Cole closed his eyes for just a moment, the way a man closes his eyes when something he has been suspecting turns out to be true. He did not let the boy see him do it. When he opened them again, his face had not changed. He looked straight ahead down the long gray length of Grand River at the bare trees and the soft-edged buildings and the few people moving along the sidewalk in heavy coats, and he made the calculation, the same calculation he had made many times in many different rooms in his long life. The calculation was very simple. There was a boy behind him. There was a wheelchair under him. There was a city around them. There was time. There was still time. They reached the coffee place at the end of the 4th block. It was a small storefront wedged between a dry cleaner and a closed bookstore, with a hand-painted sign above the door that read in plain blue letters, "Miss Ruthie's." The window was steamed up from the inside, and the smell coming out from under the door was the smell of coffee and warm milk and something baked very recently, cinnamon and butter and brown sugar all wound together. Caleb's stomach tightened so hard at the smell of it that he had to stop pushing for a second and take a small breath. Edmund noticed. Edmund did not say anything. He simply waited the small extra beat that Caleb needed, and then when the boy began to push again, he said in his quiet voice, "There is a small ramp on the side. You can come around through the alley. Miss Ruthie built it herself the year her sister got sick. It is easier than the front step." Caleb pushed the chair around the side of the building, down a narrow alley where the brick walls cut the wind into a softer thing, and up a gentle wooden ramp to a side door painted the same blue as the sign. The door opened before he could knock. A tall woman in her 60s with a long apron tied twice around her waist and a head of close-cropped gray hair stood in the doorway with a dish towel over one shoulder and a look on her face that was somewhere between exasperation and joy. "Edmund Cole," she said, "you said you would come Monday. It is Thursday. I had a meeting Monday. You always have a meeting Monday. Ruthie, this is Caleb Hayes." He helped me out of a tight spot on the corner of Grand River and Linwood, and he was kind enough to walk me the rest of the way over. "Caleb, this is Miss Ruth Beauchamp, who has been making the best biscuits in the state of Michigan for 31 years. Miss Ruthie's eyes shifted from Edmund's face to Caleb's, and Caleb watched her see him. He watched her see the electrical tape sneakers and the oversized jacket and the thin face and the careful, watchful eyes. And he watched her not change her expression in any obvious way. And he understood, in the small, fast way that children who have been on their own come to understand these things, that Miss Ruthie had seen children who looked like him before, and that her kitchen had probably fed more than one of them. And that nothing in her face was going to make him feel like he was a problem someone was about to solve. "Mr. Hayes," she said, and she put out her hand the way you put out a hand to any adult man you have just been introduced to. "Welcome to my place. Come on and out of that wind." Caleb shook her hand. Her palm was warm and dry and her grip was firm, and she let go at exactly the right moment, neither too quickly nor too slowly. He pushed the wheelchair through the door and into the kitchen, which was small and very warm and smelled even more strongly of the cinnamon and butter than the sidewalk outside had suggested. Two tall sheet pans of something golden and just baked were cooling on a rack by the stove. A large pot of soup was simmering on the back burner with the lid tilted slightly to let the steam out. A radio in the corner was playing soft jazz at a volume that was almost not a volume at all. Miss Ruthie led them through the kitchen and out into the small front room of the shop, where 6 tables sat under hanging lamps with green glass shades, and where a single old man was reading a newspaper at the table nearest the window. She walked them to the table farthest from the door in the warmest corner of the room, and she pulled out a chair for Edmund's wheelchair to be rolled up to and another chair across from it for Caleb. "Sit down, Mr. Hayes," she said. "I am bringing you a plate." "Ma'am, I do not have any money." "I did not ask you for any money. Sit down." Caleb sat down. He took off the oversized jacket very carefully, folded it once across the back of the chair, and sat with his hands in his lap and his back straight, the way his mother had taught him to sit at a table in front of someone who had cooked for him. Edmund watched him do it. Edmund did not say anything about it. Miss Ruthie disappeared into the kitchen. She came back 2 minutes later with a tray. On the tray was a wide white bowl of chicken and rice soup, steam curling slowly up from the surface of it. 2 of the golden biscuits split in half and spread with butter that was already melting into the soft insides. A small dish of strawberry jam, a tall glass of cold milk, and a smaller mug of black coffee for Edmund. She set the soup and the biscuits and the milk in front of Caleb and the coffee in front of Edmund, and she said nothing else. She turned and walked back to the kitchen and left them alone. Caleb looked at the food. He did not move. He sat very still with his hands in his lap, and he looked at the food the way a person looks at something they are afraid to believe in. Edmund picked up his coffee cup and took a slow sip and looked out the window at the gray afternoon. "Eat, Caleb," he said quietly. "Eat as much as you want. There is more in the kitchen." Caleb picked up the spoon. His hand was steady, but only because he was making it be steady. He dipped the spoon into the soup and lifted it to his mouth and tasted the first hot thing that had touched his tongue in 2 days, and he held very still for a long moment with his eyes closed and the spoon resting against the inside of his lower lip. He did not make a sound. He did not let his shoulders shake. He simply swallowed and dipped the spoon again and ate another bite, and then another, slowly and carefully, the way a person eats who has learned that eating too fast after being hungry is a thing that makes the body hurt in unexpected ways. Edmund did not look at him. Edmund had turned his head almost imperceptibly toward the window, and he was watching the small, slow movement of the afternoon on the other side of the glass, the way a delivery van paused at the corner and then turned, the way a woman in a long brown coat walked past with a small dog on a leash, the way the gray light shifted half a shade as a cloud moved somewhere above the city. He let the boy eat. He understood in a way that very few people who had not been hungry as a child ever understood, that the kindest thing he could do for the boy in the next 10 minutes was to look in another direction. The soup was halfway gone before Caleb spoke. "Sir," he said, "this is the best thing I have ever tasted." Edmund smiled a small smile at the window without turning his head. "Miss Ruthie's mother made that soup before she did. Her grandmother made it before that. There is a recipe somewhere, but I do not think any of them ever wrote it down. It is the kind of recipe that lives in a person's hands." Caleb thought about that. He thought about his own mother and the way she had made grits on Sunday mornings before she got sick, the way her hands had moved without her thinking about them, the way she had never measured anything, and the way everything she made had tasted exactly the same every single time. He picked up one of the biscuits and broke it in half and put a small, careful spoonful of the strawberry jam on it and ate it and closed his eyes again. "My mama used to make biscuits," he said. "Not like these, but pretty good." "What was her name, Caleb?" "Marlene, sir, Marlene Hayes." "Marlene." Edmund turned his head now slowly and looked at the boy across the table. "That is a beautiful name. It means little warrior. Did you know that?" "No, sir." "Well, it does." Caleb did not answer. He picked up the glass of milk and drank half of it down in one long swallow, and he set the glass back on the table and wiped his upper lip with the back of his hand, and he looked at Edmund for the first time the way a child looks at someone he is beginning to trust, which is to say with his eyes a little more open than they had been a few minutes before. "Sir, can I ask you something?" "You can ask me anything, Caleb." "Why are you being so nice to me?" Edmund Cole set down his coffee cup. He folded his hands carefully on the white tablecloth, the way an old man folds his hands when he is preparing to say something he has said inside his own head many times but has not said out loud in a long while. He looked at the boy across the table and he took a small breath. "Caleb," he said, "a long time ago when I was about your age, I lived in a part of Detroit that does not really exist anymore. The houses were knocked down in the 70s. The street was renamed. The neighborhood I grew up in is mostly a parking lot now and a piece of a highway. My father worked at the Dodge main plant on the east side, and my mother took in laundry, and we were not poor exactly, but we were close enough to poor that we could see it clearly when we looked out the window. And in the winter of 1952, when I was 9 years old, the same age as you are now, my father was hurt at the plant. A piece of equipment fell on his leg and broke it in 3 places, and he could not work for almost half a year. And in those 6 months, my mother and my father and my 2 younger sisters and I came as close to going hungry as a family can come without actually going under. Caleb had stopped eating. He was watching Edmund's face very carefully. There was a man on our street, Edmund went on, who owned a small market 2 blocks over. His name was Mr. Sokolowski. He was a Polish man. He had come over from the old country after the war. He had a thick accent and a wife who made the best pierogies on the east side of Detroit and 3 sons who all worked in the store with him. And one afternoon in February of that year, I was walking home from school past his market, and I was hungry. Hungrier than I want to remember now. And Mr. Sokolowski was outside sweeping the sidewalk in front of the store. And he stopped me as I was walking past, and he said, "Edmund, I have a problem." Edmund paused. He took a slow sip of his coffee. He said, "Edmund, my back is hurting today, and I have a delivery to make 4 blocks from here, and I need a strong boy to push the cart for me. Will you do it? I will pay you a quarter." And of course, Edmund said. I said yes. I would have pushed that cart 20 blocks for a quarter. So I went with him to the back of the store, and we loaded the cart, which was a heavy old wooden thing with 2 metal wheels and a long handle. And it was full of bags of flour and sugar, and cans of tomatoes and a sack of potatoes. And I pushed it 4 blocks to a woman's house on Field Street, and Mr. Sokolowski walked beside me with his hand on the cart. And he talked to me the whole way about the weather and about baseball and about his grandfather who had been a cooper in a small village outside of Krakow. And when we got to the woman's house and unloaded the cart and were walking back, he gave me the quarter. And then he stopped me on the sidewalk and he said, "Edmund, my back is going to hurt tomorrow too. Will you come back tomorrow and help me again?" Edmund looked at Caleb across the table. The boy had set his spoon down. His soup was still steaming. "I came back the next day," Edmund said, "and the day after that, and the day after that. For the rest of that winter and the spring after it and through the summer, Mr. Sokolowski's back was hurting every single day. He had the worst back on the east side of Detroit. And every single day he paid me a quarter, which was a great deal of money for a 9-year-old boy in 1952. And at the end of every day, his wife sent me home with a paper sack of food that she said she could not use up before it went bad. A loaf of bread sometimes, a piece of kielbasa, half a dozen eggs, a jar of borscht. Whatever the family had that day, a little extra always seemed to find its way into that sack." Edmund paused. He looked down at his folded hands. "It was not until I was a grown man, Caleb, that I understood that Mr. Sokolowski's back had never hurt, not one day of it. He was a strong man with a strong back, and he had 3 sons who could have pushed any cart in the city of Detroit. He did not need me. He invented a job for me because he knew my family was hungry. And he knew my father was a proud man who would not have taken charity from anyone. And he knew that the only way to feed the cold children that winter was to make sure I came home every day with a quarter I had earned and a sack of food that nobody had given to me." The kitchen door behind them swung open, and Miss Ruthie came out with a second small dish, a bowl of warm peach cobbler with a spoonful of cream melting on top of it. She set it down in front of Caleb without a word and went back into the kitchen. Caleb did not look at the cobbler. He was looking at Edmund. "Mr. Sokolowski died when I was 16, Edmund said. He never knew that the boy he had hired to push his cart would one day own a factory of his own, and then 2, and then a great many more than that. He never knew that I named my first daughter after his wife, a fact that my own wife found a little odd at the time but agreed to anyway because she understood the reason. He never knew that I have spent the last 50 years of my life looking for the children who reminded me of myself at 9 years old, because the truth, Caleb, the truth that I learned a long time ago and that I have never forgotten is that what Mr. Sokolowski did for me was not charity. It was something much harder to do than charity. It was respect. He gave me a job. He paid me money. He let me come home to my mother with food I had earned. He never once let me feel like I was being saved." Edmund leaned forward slightly. His brown eyes were very steady on Caleb's face. "You ran across 2 lanes of traffic to help me today, Caleb. You did not know who I was. You did not ask for anything. You pushed me 4 blocks in a hard wind when nobody else on Grand River would even slow down. So I am not being nice to you, son. I am paying a debt that I have owed for 72 years to a man who is not alive anymore for me to pay it to. And the only way I have ever figured out how to pay it is by finding the next boy who needs what I needed and doing for him what was done for me." He sat back. He picked up his coffee cup again with hands that were not quite steady, and he took a small sip. "Eat your cobbler, Caleb," he said quietly. "It is best when it is warm." Caleb did not eat the cobbler right away. He sat very still in the warm, small dining room of Miss Ruthie's, with the soft jazz playing from the kitchen and the steam still curling up from his half-finished soup. And he looked down at the white tablecloth, and his eyes filled up the way eyes fill up when something inside a person has finally been allowed to feel the full weight of what has been pressing on it for a very long time. He did not let the tears fall. He blinked them back the way he had taught himself to blink them back for 19 nights behind a loading dock. But Edmund Cole saw them. Edmund Cole had been waiting for them. Edmund did not look directly at the boy. He understood, after a lifetime of being old and watching the young, that there were certain moments when looking at a person directly was a kind of small unkindness, because it forced them to either meet the look or turn away from it, and either choice cost them something they did not have to spend. He looked instead at the steam rising from his coffee cup, and he gave Caleb the small private second of room he needed to pull himself together. The bell above the front door of the shop chimed softly. A tall man in a long black coat and a dark wool cap stepped inside, brushing the cold off his shoulders. He was in his early 50s, broad through the chest, with a kind, weathered face and a careful way of moving that suggested a man who had spent a great many years in a profession where being noticed too quickly was a thing to be avoided. He saw Edmund at the table in the corner, and he made his way over without hurrying, and he stopped a respectful distance from the table, the way a person stops at the edge of a conversation he has not yet been invited into. "Mr. Cole? Frank, come meet someone. Caleb Hayes, this is Frank Delacroix. He has been driving me around the city of Detroit for the past 19 years, and he is one of the finest men I have ever known. Frank, this is Mr. Hayes, who got me out of a crack in the asphalt on Grand River this afternoon when I had given up hope of getting out of it myself." Frank Delacroix took off his wool cap and tucked it under his arm, and he put out a large hand to Caleb across the table, and he said with complete seriousness, "Mr. Hayes, thank you for taking care of him. He gets stuck more often than he likes to let on." Caleb shook the man's hand. Frank's palm was enormous and warm, and the handshake was firm and brief, exactly the way a grown man shakes another grown man's hand at the end of a long day. Frank let go and stepped back and stood with his cap under his arm and waited for whatever was going to come next, because he had been working for Edmund Cole for 19 years, and he knew that when Mr. Cole sat in a corner of Miss Ruthie's with a small, thin boy across the table from him, the next thing that came was almost always going to require Frank to do something he had not expected to do that afternoon. Edmund turned back to Caleb. He did not lean forward. He did not soften his voice into the careful tone that adults sometimes used on children when they were about to ask for something. He spoke the way he had spoken all afternoon, plainly, and with the small, particular respect of a man addressing another man. "Caleb, I want to make you an offer, and I want you to listen to it all the way through before you give me your answer. Will you do that?" "Yes, sir. I live about 40 minutes from here in a house outside the city. It is not a fancy house by the standards of houses like that, but it is bigger than one old man in a wheelchair needs, and a great deal of it sits empty most of the time. There is a woman who has been keeping house for me for 36 years. Her name is Loretta. She lives in an apartment over the garage with a small terrier named Biscuit, and she is the closest thing to family I have left in the world. There is a bedroom on the first floor of the main house that has its own bathroom and its own door that locks from the inside, and Loretta has been keeping it ready for guests for so long that the sheets in it are always clean and the bed is always made. I would like to offer you that room, not for charity, not as a favor. I would like to offer it to you because the alternative, which is for you to go back behind the loading dock at the old Sears building tonight in 28-degree weather, is a thing I am not going to be able to stop thinking about if I let it happen." Edmund paused. He looked steadily at the boy. "You are not obligated, Caleb. Frank can drive you anywhere you want to go right now, including back to your spot behind the loading dock, and there will be no hard feelings and no questions asked. You have already given me more than enough for one afternoon. But I am 81 years old, and I have learned that some offers, when they are made, need to be made plainly and all at once. So that is the offer. You can come stay in that room tonight. You can stay tomorrow night. You can stay as long as we figure out together what comes next. I will make sure your grandmother, if she is alive, is found and contacted. I will make sure the social worker whose number is in your pocket is told you are safe. You will not disappear. You will not be a secret. You will be a young man under my roof who is being treated the way a young man should be treated." He stopped. He let the words sit on the white tablecloth between them. Frank Delacroix stood very still by the table with his cap under his arm, and he did not say anything either. He had heard Mr. Cole make this same offer, or one very much like it, 4 times in the past 19 years. Caleb did not answer right away. He was not the kind of boy who answered right away to a question that mattered. He sat in the warm dining room of Miss Ruthie's, with the small bowl of peach cobbler going slowly cool in front of him, and he thought about a great many things in a very short amount of time. He thought about the boards leaning against the wall behind the loading dock, and the way the wind had cut through them the night before so badly that he had not slept until almost morning. He thought about the sleeping bag rolled up under those boards, which had been his father's once, and was the only thing he had ever owned that he was certain had belonged to his father. He thought about the social worker's phone number folded against his chest, and about his grandmother who had been moved to a place in Pontiac he had not been able to find his way to, and about his mother who had told him on the last night she was lucid that there were 2 kinds of people in the world, the ones who closed their hands and the ones who opened them, and that he should always try to be the second kind no matter how much the world told him to be the first. He thought about Edmund Cole. He thought about Mr. Sokolowski, who he had only just heard of an hour ago and would now never forget. He thought about Frank standing patient with his cap under his arm. He thought about Miss Ruthie, who had set the cobbler in front of him without a word and walked away. He thought about the cinnamon and the butter and the soup that had tasted the way his mother's hands used to taste a meal into existence on a Sunday morning. He thought about the door that locked from the inside. "Sir," he said at last, very quietly. "I would like to come, thank you, sir." Edmund nodded once, the way a man nods at the close of a long, careful negotiation in which both sides have come out exactly where they should have come out. He turned to Frank. "Bring the car around to the side, Frank. We will be along in a few minutes. Caleb has not finished his cobbler." Frank put his cap back on his head. "Yes, sir." He nodded to Caleb. "Mr. Hayes." And he went out through the front door, and the bell chimed softly behind him. Edmund did not push the boy to eat faster. He sat across from him and finished his coffee in slow, patient sips, and he watched the late afternoon light shift another shade darker through the steamed front window, and he let the boy eat the cobbler one careful spoonful at a time, the way Caleb had eaten everything else that afternoon, like a person who had learned to make small good things last. Miss Ruthie came out once with a paper bag and set it on the table beside Edmund's elbow and did not explain what was in it. Edmund did not ask. He simply slid 2 folded bills across the table to her, which she did not pick up, and she went back into the kitchen, and the bills sat where Edmund had left them, and that was the end of any conversation about payment. When Caleb had finished, Edmund put on his gloves and adjusted his scarf, and Caleb pulled the oversized jacket off the back of his chair and worked his thin arms into the 2 long sleeves. The paper bag from Miss Ruthie, which contained, as Caleb would discover the next morning, 2 of the biscuits and a small jar of the strawberry jam wrapped in a clean dish towel, was placed carefully on Caleb's lap as he pushed the wheelchair back through the kitchen and down the wooden ramp and into the alley where Frank was already waiting beside a long, dark sedan with the rear door open. Frank helped Edmund out of the wheelchair and into the back seat with the practiced, careful motion of a man who had done it 10,000 times before. He folded the wheelchair and put it in the trunk. Caleb climbed into the back seat beside Edmund with the paper bag in his lap and the photograph of his mother and the folded social worker's number in his inside jacket pocket, and Frank closed the door and walked around to the driver's seat. The interior of the car was warm and smelled faintly of leather and peppermint and the kind of soap an old man uses. Caleb sat very still. The drive took 36 minutes. They left the gray streets of the city and crossed the bridge over the river and moved north through neighborhoods Caleb had only ever seen from the windows of school buses on field trips, and then past the neighborhoods entirely, out into a stretch of road lined with bare trees and long dark fields, and the occasional warm yellow square of a farmhouse window in the distance. Caleb watched it all without speaking. Edmund did not speak either. Frank drove with the same careful, steady patience he had shown all afternoon, and once, when Caleb's eyes began to drift closed against his will in the warm leather seat, Frank reached up without looking and turned the heater down a half-degree so the boy would not get too hot and wake himself. The house, when they finally reached it, sat at the end of a long gravel drive lined with old maples. It was a long, low brick house with white shutters and a wide front porch and a single soft light burning above the door. Loretta was waiting on the porch with a shawl pulled tight around her shoulders and Biscuit the Terrier sitting alertly at her feet, and she did not make any kind of fuss over Caleb when Frank helped him out of the car. She simply said, "Mr. Hayes, welcome. I am Loretta. Your room is the second door on the right inside." There is a clean towel on the bed and a fresh toothbrush still in its package on the bathroom counter, and I will leave a glass of warm milk on the nightstand in case you wake up thirsty. We will talk in the morning." That was all. She did not ask him a single question. She did not look at his sneakers. She held the front door open and let him walk in ahead of her into the warm front hall of the house. And Biscuit, who was a very old dog with very particular opinions about strangers, walked over to Caleb and pressed his small gray head against the boy's knee and stood there for a long, quiet moment, and then walked away again, having decided. That was the first night. Caleb slept for 11 hours. He woke up the next morning in a bed with clean sheets and a heavy quilt and sunlight coming through a window with white curtains, and for almost a full minute he did not know where he was, and then he remembered, and he lay very still and looked at the ceiling, and he understood that something in his life had changed in a way he was not going to be able to undo. The story did not end that morning because real stories never do. It went on through the winter and into the spring. Edmund's lawyers found Caleb's grandmother in the care facility in Pontiac and arranged for Caleb to visit her twice a week. And slowly, over the course of many months, they helped to make Caleb her legal ward with Edmund and Loretta named as his guardians for as long as he needed them to be. The social worker, Patricia, who had been quietly working Caleb's file in the back of a filing cabinet for half a year, came out to the house in early January and sat at the kitchen table with Edmund and Loretta and Caleb for almost 4 hours. And when she left, she said it was the first case in her 22 years of work that had ever resolved itself without her having to fight a single person for any of it. Caleb went back to school in a different district, where nobody knew him and nobody asked him questions he could not answer. He kept his electrical tape sneakers in the back of his closet for 2 years, and then one day decided he did not need them anymore and gave them to a younger boy at his school who needed them more. He kept the social worker's phone number folded in a small wooden box on his nightstand. He kept the photograph of his mother in a frame on the dresser. He kept on a small shelf above his desk a brown paper bag that he had unfolded and smoothed flat and pressed under glass, because it was the bag that had held the biscuits Miss Ruthie had given him the first day, and he had decided early on that some things should be kept exactly as they were. The story of how they met never became a news story. There were no cameras on the corner of Grand River and Linwood that afternoon. Nobody in the city of Detroit knew that one of the quietest billionaires in the country had been pushed across an intersection by a hungry 9-year-old boy. Edmund did not write about it. Caleb did not tell anyone at his new school. Only Frank and Miss Ruthie and Loretta and Patricia ever knew, and they were the kind of people who knew how to hold a thing that was not theirs to tell. The years went by. Edmund lived longer than his doctors had said he would, the way stubborn men sometimes do when they have a reason to stay. He saw Caleb graduate from middle school, and then from high school as the valedictorian of his class, and then from the University of Michigan with a degree in social work that Caleb had chosen entirely on his own, and that he had paid for with a scholarship Edmund had quietly arranged years before and had never once mentioned. Edmund did not live to see Caleb finish graduate school. He died in his sleep on a quiet morning in late March in the same bed in the same house, with Loretta sitting in the chair by the window and Caleb, then 21 years old, holding his hand. In Edmund's will, there was a letter for Caleb. It was short. It said, "I want you to remember 3 things. The first is that your mother was a little warrior, and so are you. The second is that you ran across 2 lanes of traffic on a day when nobody else would even slow down. The third is that the world only ever gets better one person at a time, and you, Caleb Hayes, made mine better. Now go and do the rest." Caleb is 41 years old now. He runs a nonprofit in Detroit that finds children sleeping where they should not be sleeping and gives them a door that locks from the inside and a bed with clean sheets. He named it after a Polish grocer he never met. He calls it Sokolowski Place. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment below telling me which part stayed with you the longest, and subscribe to the channel for more stories of quiet kindness and the small moments that change everything. Thank you for being here.